Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Journalism and New Media Studies, SOJNMS, Master's Program, Master of Arts, Journalism and Digital Media, MJM, First Year, MJM-021 Reporting Techniques, Block-1 New Concepts, Unit-1 News Definitions, Concept and Principles. 1.0 Introduction. Human beings' curiosity to know and comprehend as to what is happening around them is unlimited and unbound. People are always eager to know why and how are certain events and incidents taking place, who is responsible for these events, who are being affected by them, and what does the future hold for them. If these events are of recent occurrence and are of interest to a vast majority of people, it becomes all the more important and necessary for them to look for further information about these events. By piecing together the details of all these points, some concrete, some hazy and quite often valuable and useful facts emerge. Whatever emerges from such information is quite often crucial, and people need to know these and all possible details about these. Such type of information, therefore, is called news. In this unit we shall systematically define news and provide you with all the necessary perspectives on news. 1.1 Learning Outcomes. After you have gone through this unit, you should be able to discuss the concepts and definitions of news, describe the principal elements of news and news writing, and examine various news writing techniques. 1.2 Concept and definition of news. It is said that news is difficult to define. However, news remains something that surprises the reader, listener and viewer, and will always remain so. Let us look at some of its definitions. Most dictionaries impart the meaning of news as an account of a recent event or information that's not known previously. According to the Random House Dictionary of English Language, the meaning of news is a report of a recent event, intelligence, information. The Oxford Dictionary says, news is the report of recent events or occurrences brought or coming to one as new information, new occurrences as a subject of report or talk. Any important information coming from north, east, west, and south, which deserve to be taken as news. Lord Northcliffe, the famous British editor, said of news, news is something that somebody somewhere doesn't want to print, wants to suppress. All the rest is advertising. News is what people want to read about themselves. News is essentially about people, events, surrounding people, and places. Get the truth and print it, said John S. Knight, founder of a greatest U.S. newspaper chain, adding, news is heavy on community service and society interest and mindful of the city's pecking order in civic and social affairs. When a dog bites man, that's not news, but when a man bites dog, that's news. News is what affects readers directly. An emotional event that will make people laugh or cry. News is a timely account of a recent, interesting and significant event. Out of the ordinary, departure from routine convention. Change. The passing of an era, old landmarks being torn down, new lifestyles replacing old, new attitudes on old questions, anniversaries of major events. A journalism professor of Stanford University, USA, Chilton R. Bush, defined news as the report of an event that a reader can and will understand. Another pragmatic view in defining news says, news is an account of an event which a newspaper prints in the belief that by so doing it will profit. After reading the above varied definitions of news, you would have understood the broad nature and concept of news. But it is difficult to accurately define news. For, to be correctly termed as the news, any information must be factual, new and interesting. There must be facts to report. Without facts, there can be no news. It is important that these facts must be new to the reader, listener and the viewer. Again, news is what's being published on the news pages of newspapers and magazines, broadcast on radio and telecast on television networks, or put out on the internet. News is also about the lives, loves and scandals of the famous, the rich and the notorious. As William Metz, professor of journalism, University of Nevada, USA, says, while it may not be possible to describe it precisely in words, every news reporter must come to a personal understanding of nature of news, must reach some conclusion about its essence before it is possible to recognize news when it happens. We can also say in simple terms, as a well-known British writer and author, Evelyn Waugh, wrote in his book, Scoop, way back in 1938, that news is what a chap who doesn't care much about anything wants to read. And it's only news until he has read it. After that it's dead. Here, it's also important to know as to what we mean by news sense, or news judgment. Being able to identify what will interest readers is called having news sense, said a noted American professor of journalism, Wyford Hicks. The important dictum about the news, which is even somewhat contradictory, is, bad news sells more newspapers than good news. So, what would be the news today? Given the limits of space, time and resources, what's important, what isn't, what's to be left in, what's to be left out, and in the age of internet, infinity, who's to say what's news, asks Wyford Hicks. Thus, it will not be an exaggeration to say that there are almost as many definitions of the news as there are reporters/journalists. Most news reporters will, of course, agree that every occurrence or event in itself is not and cannot be the news. 1.3 Elements of news writing. Now that you know the meaning, definition and content of news, we will discuss the principal elements or ingredients of writing news. Because, if you are reading your newspaper carefully, you would surely have noticed that a news item, or a news story as it is also called, is not written in a style or fashion we write our letters or essays or any other piece of writing. News has to be written, presented or broadcast in such a manner or style that the reader, listener or viewer gets the most important information in a shortest possible span of time, in minimum words, without using superfluous, unnecessary, and redundant words. It is often said that a news reporter should have a nose for news. They may have their whims and fancies of smelling, sensing, or recognizing the news, but there are certain established and well-known factors and ingredients which, if present in the event or happening that have taken place, which for sure would be considered raising the event, happening, occurrence to the pedestals of a standard news story. Here are some of the most important ones: timeliness, proximity, prominence, dimension, consequence, conflict, empathy, adventure and weather, among others. Timeliness. The time of occurrence of an event is the most important element of a news story. People want to know about the event as quickly as possible. Report of an event that happened yesterday or the day before yesterday is generally deemed stale and often not considered fit for publication, unless it is of extraordinary nature, or extremely significant in some manner. So, the time of the event's occurrence is immensely crucial for it to be considered news. News may cease to be news after 24 or even after 12 hours in today's race against time and the age of internet and smartphones. Readers, listeners or viewers nowadays very well recognize the immediacy and perishability as profusely vital factors in newsfall and news reporting. It is said that stale news is abhorred as stale bread. Proximity, closeness or nearness of an event or an incident to the audience has tremendous importance for reporters as well as for a newspaper. Proximity could be geographical or relevance to the audience. The more local or closer the site where the event took place, the greater will be its importance to be termed as news. To take an example, Kolkata, June 4th. The Kolkatans were taken aback by a series of blasts that took place in the local Park Street, claiming 15 lives on Monday evening. This story would naturally be on front page in all the local newspapers, but may be relegated to a remote corner of the inside pages by the papers in Jammu, Bhopal, Guwahati, Surat, Mathura or Chandigarh. A local angle to the news has greater appeal and greater relevance due to the fact that the victims may be known to the newspaper staff and could be its readers, buyers, and advertisers or people living close to the newspaper office. Prominence. If a well-known personality happens to be involved in the event, it will invariably make news. For example, if the Prime Minister strains his ankle while walking to the car, or a celebrity has a bathroom fall, it makes news. The important fact is that the famous, the infamous and even the eccentric command a special appeal for audiences. This is also due to the fact that high-profile families enjoy privacy and often make news for any pleasant or unpleasant event. Dimension: the number of people involved or affected or losses that occur in terms of huge money by an event makes news. For example, if 500 or more people die in an earthquake in Manila, the Philippines, it makes news even in India, as human lives are precious wherever these are lost. But if heavy rains flood low-lying areas in Mumbai or Patna, and 23 people are killed, and 4 high-rise buildings collapse, it makes much bigger news in India, and automatically gets front-page treatment, possibly with telltales photographs from the scene. Similarly, if in a fire in Vadodara property worth lakhs is destroyed and several deaths are reported, that too will need front-page featuring. Here, we see the number of people though less, but the proximity factor comes in making the news local, requiring a different and serious way of presentation in the newspaper. Impact: if the U.S. President or British Prime Minister announces his plans to sanction military aid to Pakistan, it's bound to impact the Indo-US or Indo-British ties, and also Indo-Pak relations. Similarly, if the Union government increases income tax in its annual budget, or levies a tax on purchase of cars, that make all India news. Or, if the Chief Minister of a state in India abolishes state grants for the private aided schools, the children of lower middle class or poor parents availing fee concession may be hit adversely as the consequence of the new policy. Thus, it will make big news for all citizens of that state. Human interest: quite often, newspaper reporters come across situations which induce emotions of mercy or sentiments or sympathy. For example, if a visually challenged person performs some daring act, such as scaling Mount Everest, or a hearing-challenged boy scores a meritorious position in a competitive examination, these are human interest stories. Again, if a bicycle rickshaw puller's son gets selected in IIM/IIT admission test, or a primary school teacher's daughter finds herself in the civil services merit list, we call these as human interest stories. You may recall the incident when a 4-year-old child by the name of Prince fell in a wayside 30-foot-deep well some years ago. The rescue work by the army personnel was put out live on many television channels. This was a live human interest story which attracted the interest of viewers all over India for many hours, till the rescue act was completed. Conflict of any type: political, social, cultural, communal, among some sections of society, difference of opinion among 2 or more political parties, conflict among some warring groups, or more of such conflicts always make news. As you would have seen that differences between the Bharatiya Janata Party and the Communist Party, Marxist, and the Indian National Congress on the Indo-US nuclear deal made news in India for several months. You will find that many more such issues figure in newspapers as news very often. Moodily or daringly by disabled individuals always make news anywhere. When a 70-year-old Japanese woman attempted to scale the Mount Everest, the highest mountain peak in the world, and succeeded, it made international news. This was a case of adventure appearing as front-page banner headline in Japan. Besides making news in many other countries, novelty, novel and rare incidents make news. When, for example, an American woman gave birth to 8 children, each weighing about 200 grams, and they all survived, it made world news. Again, when an 8-year-old boy in Orissa competed in a marathon race with grown-ups, and won it, that became a novel event to be deemed as news. Empathy: often, several events mirroring tragedy, humor, oddity, victory, failure take place now and then in our life. Quite a few of these happenings attract our concern or empathy: an old-age couple losing all its children in fire, flood, accident, a child falling off from the arms of its mother in a moving bus/train, and getting crushed under its wheels, all make news. For all human hearts go out in sympathy for the loved ones so affected. weather, climate, environment, weather, extreme heat, cold, rain, storm. Pollution affects all of us, and usually bad weather affects us badly. Remember how the Indian Ocean tsunami made news all over the world in so many countries, including India, which killed hundreds of men, women, children, and wreaked unusual, unimaginable losses of property, animals and marine life. For months together, this was considered as an extraordinary change in weather, and was forecast to be a prodigious problem of environment for all time to come across the globe. Climatic changes, different aspects of environment degradation, pollution as well as efforts towards environment conservation make news. Given above are some of their most important elements, which often make news. However, there are always occasions when we find new situations arising and figuring as eminent news stories in the media all over the world. 1.4 Principles and Techniques of News Writing. As we mentioned earlier, news has to be written in such a manner and drafted in a style that the main or the principal information is conveyed to the audience in minimum possible words and in minimum possible time. Therefore, the first paragraph of the news story, which is called lead or intro, introduction, presents the gist of the event/happening in about 24 to 30 words, as far as possible. We will also briefly mention how to draft an intro/lead, and of how many kinds of leads are there for writing the news. 1.4.15 Ws and 1H. The news stories are written using 5 Ws and 1H in the first paragraph itself. This is probably the first and the most important, and traditional principle of writing a news item. The first paragraph of news, called the intro or lead, should contain answers to 5 Ws, and 1 H, namely, who, what, when, where, why, and how. This is the most cardinal principle of writing news and followed all over the world. The first paragraph of the news item must clearly state as to who is the main actor, character, object, subject or concern of the event, which needs to be told or written about. Is it the president, prime minister, any minister, governor, a well-known foreign dignitary, or any other prominent person? Is it a notorious criminal or any other individual of any status, whom people know in some context or the other? The other 4 Ws and 1 H are, what happened? When did it happen? Where did happen? Why did it happen? How did it happen? Depending upon the nature of the event, the reporter has to decide which of these Ws is more important and crucial to the story. Obviously, politically prominent persons such as president, prime minister and other such people in government or in society will get more attention and also more space. The time when the event occurs is also extremely significant. Any event having impact on a large majority of people will also be of great import. For example, a rail accident taking place at midnight will be the important time to be taken note of both for the news reporter, for the editorial desk, and for general public also. The venue of event also assumes great importance in a news story. For example, if the event occurs in Prime Minister's office, Parliament House, or in State Assembly, a railway station, in mosque or temple, every place mentioned here has its own unique significance. But if it happens on the venue where a large number of people are present, the consequences can be well imagined. Therefore, each W has its own importance in the context of the event which is reported. Incidentally, the 5 What's 1 H formula of writing the intro or lead is attributed to the late British author who lived and worked in India, Rudyard Kipling. He wrote for the daily English language newspaper, The Pioneer, then published from Lucknow in the 1930s. Kipling's favorite saying for writing news based on this formula was as follows: I keep 6 honest serving men, they taught me all I knew, their names are what, and why and when and how and where and who. Given below are some examples to tell you as to how intros and leads can be drafted, based on the formula 5 Ws and 1 H. When, on coming Monday, August 15th, at 8 a.m., the Prime Minister will address the nation on its 70th Independence Day from the ramparts of Delhi's historic Red Fort. Where, from the ramparts of Delhi's historic Red Fort, the Prime Minister will address the nation on August 15th this year, the 70th Independence Day of the country, at 8 a.m. WHO. Prime Minister will address the Independence Day function on Monday, August 15th, at 8 a.m. from the rampart of Delhi's historic Red Fort. What, on the Independence Day, on August 15th at 8 a.m., Prime Minister will address the nation from the rampart of Delhi's historic Red Fort. Why? As August 15 marks the nation's 70th Independence Day, the Prime Minister will address the nation from Delhi's historic Red Fort at 8 a.m. How? From the ramparts of Delhi's historic Red Fort, Prime Minister will address the nation on August 15, which marks the 70th Independence Day, at 8 a.m. The reporter who has to decide which of the 5 W's is crucial and is key and really essential to the story, and of course to its overall development. It also depends on the fact as to where is the story being written from, and where is intended to be published. If, for instance, the reporter is in Delhi and the newspaper is in Jaipur, Bangalore, Guwahati, or Jammu, the story will have to be angled to suit the local audience of the newspaper accordingly. 1.4.2 The inverted pyramid. Another traditional technique of writing the news is in the form of an inverted pyramid. The first paragraph, i.e., the intro or the lead, contains the most important and main thrust of the news item. The body of the news item further expands, elaborates and explains rest of the story. Therefore, the main points stated in the lead or the intro have to be supported by the facts in the paragraphs that follow the lead or the intro. Thus, if you view the story in the form of a figure or a diagram, it will look like an inverted pyramid as illustrated below. The most important point in the story should be at the top, followed by less important facts, with the least important ones coming at the bottom, one by one, depending on their importance in the overall structure and length of the news story. Such a technique of writing a story is called inverted pyramid.
The lead intro of a news story, which should usually be based on inverted pyramid technique, is illustrated as under. Illustration No. 1. Inverted pyramid. This story, news, starts off with a great lead. Then, short summary of the story, and sometimes a little history for the context of story. Important stuff goes here. Becomes unimportant here. Even more unimportant. Downright dull. Can be cut. Often cut. 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 Actually, the inverted pyramid technique is a very basic method of news writing. A question may now arise in your mind as to why should one work like this. The main argument behind it is that the news theme point should be wrapped up in one sentence, or two-paragraph nutshell, with summary high up in the story. Also known as lead or nut graph, important information near the top of the story, usually in one paragraph. This has also been illustrated by Anther. Illustration given below. Illustration No. 2. Inverted pyramid. The most important facts go here. What, who, why, where and how. Then comes the next most important facts in the story, followed by the next most important, and still some important fact that could just be cut, if need to be cut again, and cut. Here are some more illustrations and diagrams to tell you as to how should the news story be constructed and written. These are borrowed from a famous book entitled Exploring Journalism, written by two most well-known American professors of journalism, Roland E. Wallesley and Lawrence R. Campbell, more than 50 years ago. In fact, the late Roland Wallesley taught at the Hislop College of Journalism at Nagpur in the early 1960s and also edited a book on journalism for Indian students. Process of news writing. A. Illustrates the form for a routine news story as it is prepared for print. Its lead summarizes the story, then the importance of information decreases gradually, until the least significant material is at the end. B. This figure is the pattern used in writing the story chronologically and is usually employed with suspended interest features. The story begins with unimportant but hugely attractive details and broadens as it nears the climax. C. This figure may be used in building a story consisting of the elements of almost equal value throughout. Most important is the lead, least so, the final details of the story. Source: Exploring Journalism by Roland A. Wolseley and Lawrence R. Campbell. 1st April 2003 History of the Inverted Pyramid. Since this traditional technique of writing the news is still being practiced, it would be useful for you to know how and when this technique of news writing was developed and came to be adopted. It is believed that the inverted pyramid technique of news writing was innovated during the American Civil War, some 150 years ago. Prior to that, news items were written in the form of a narrative, somewhat like a fiction or as an essay, story, in a chronological style, the most important point coming in the end. It was during the U.S. Civil War that the news writing style went through drastic changes. This was necessitated due to the fact that the most recent development in the progress of the Civil War had to be communicated through the Morse telegraphic mode in the first paragraph itself, and if it was put in the end of the write-up, as in the case of an essay or any other narrative, it could be lost in transit. The receiving newspaper's editorial desk could miss the news about the latest and the newest developments on the progress of the war. Therefore, to overcome that danger, war correspondents started prefixing and putting the recent most war news in the first paragraph itself, which increased the chances of the news arrival or received at the news desk in the beginning of the message itself. Though the original reason for employing the inverted pyramid technique of news writing has gone into oblivion, most news items are nowadays written in this manner and style only, almost universally. The inverted pyramid technique is also deemed to be a rational, technological, and typographical outcome of modern news writing necessity for the consumers who are busy in their lives' other important routines and can afford to spare very little time to go through the details of the long and elaborate news stories. They prefer to get their news as quickly and in the minimum possible time as the news media can deliver. The inverted pyramid has survived and it will hopefully survive for quite some time to come. The main reason is that majority of reporters even now care and need to get the most important information to the reader first, and prompt them to read, listen and view the news media output worldwide. This style of presenting the news facilitates the reporter to organize the facts of the story systematically and quickly. It is also convenient for the sub-editor to compose the story's headlines and make the news pages to attract the attention of the reader. In addition, it is time-saving for the reader to decide whether he is interested in going through the entire text of the news story. Thus, the inverted pyramid news writing style also suits newspersons at all levels. 1st April 2004 Inverted Pyramid, a critique. Of late, some senior journalism scholars and professional journalists have started questioning the inverted pyramid style. According to a well-known American journalism professor and author, Christopher Passant, why should pyramid be inverted when the pyramid in its pyramid shape, i.e., the right way up, can serve the purpose perfectly and most befittingly? For, anyway, the primary objective of the pyramid as such is to show that the point in a news story is made in a descending order of importance. The news is deliberately written in a manner that the reader can stop reading when he has just satisfied his her curiosity and desire to be informed about a particular event, and without worrying that it affects him/her in some way. Another implicit purpose of this style of news writing is to cut the story from bottom up without losing its important parts. A noted critic of the inverted pyramid philosophy, Professor William Metz of the University of Nevada, USA, feels that the inverted style has overstandardized the technique of writing news. He adds that as it is not a natural storytelling method because its climax comes at the onset, is predictable and old-fashioned. A former editor of the United Press International, UPI, Roger Tartarian, has pointed out that narrative news writing style leads will be more popular over summary leads, especially in stories reader has already heard over the air. Lately, the featurized style of news writing has started gaining acceptance over the traditional and weather-beaten inverted pyramid, especially in prominent American daily newspapers such as the New York Times, Washington Post, USA Today, the Wall Street Journal, the Los Angeles Times, the Chicago Tribune, etc. As one former managing editor of the New York Times, Turner Catledge, also said about the diminishing value of 5 Ws and 1 H some time ago, once it will no longer be necessary, as maybe never was, to wrap up in one sentence or paragraph all the traditional 5 Ws. Thus, there is need to caution against intensive use of the inverted pyramid. Techniques of news writing don't worship the pyramid, it's only a way of visualizing the most common structure of a traditional news story. The guiding principle in developing a story is, what does the reader needs or wants to know? If answering these questions is the meat of the story, do it. Reporting speeches is not done in this format. Thus it is time that the inverted pyramid format gave way to a more scientific, currently acceptable news writing method to meet the changing needs of the modern consumer of the news media. Activity 2. Go through a newspaper of your choice on any day and identify 5 stories which could have been written without following the inverted pyramid style, and rewrite them in a different style. 1.5 Let us some UP. In this unit, we have discussed the definition, concepts, principles and techniques of news writing. The news has been defined as a timely report of significant events that concern and interest majority of people. News means different things to different people. What's news to one may not be news to another person. The definition and concept of news also varies from place to place. We discussed the various techniques of news writing such as 5 Ws and 1 H and the inverted pyramid style. We also discussed the elements and ingredients that make news and kinds of news. Intros and leads were also discussed and illustrated with figures. Even though there are several types of leads, only a few are used by reporters these days. The style and content of news writing are often dictated by several new type of considerations such as ideology and policy of news media organizations. News publication is also affected by advertising, audiences, preferences for or against mixing news with entertainment, and the public opinion about certain vital issues. Some of the issues discussed in this unit shall be expanded in subsequent units of this block. 1.5 Summary. In this unit, we have discussed the definition, concepts, principles and techniques of news writing. The news has been defined as a timely report of significant Events that concern and interest majority of people. News means different things to different people. What's news to one may not be news to another person. The definition and concept of news also varies from place to place. We discussed the various techniques of news writing such as 5 Ws and 1 H and the inverted pyramid style. We also discussed the elements and ingredients that make news and kinds of news. Intros and leads were also discussed and illustrated with figures. Even though there are several types of leads, only a few are used by reporters these days. The style and content of news writing are often dictated by several new type of considerations such as ideology and policy of news. Media organizations. News publication is also affected by advertising, audiences, preferences for or against mixing news with entertainment, and the public opinion about certain vital issues. Some of the issues discussed in this unit shall be expanded in subsequent units of this block. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more updates, and we will see you with the next chapter.